KATV, in partnership with Talk Business and Politics, presents Your Voice, Your Future, The Race for Governor, moderated by Chris May and Roby Brock.
Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. KATV, in partnership with Talk Business and Politics and TV stations KFSM in Fort Smith and KAIT in Jonesboro, proud to present a debate tonight featuring the candidates for governor of Arkansas. Joining us tonight in our studio is the nominee for the Democratic Party, Jared Henderson, and the Libertarian Party's nominee, Mark West. The incumbent governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, is also on the ballot. He was invited to join us for this forum on this date or another, but he declined. Outside of our studio here tonight, Mr. Henderson's supporters were waving signs in support of their candidate, with one showing exactly what he thought of the governor's decision not to appear with us tonight. He was wearing a chicken mask with an Asa for Governor sticker on his lapel. Well, regardless, over the next hour, Mr. Henderson and Mr. West will debate the issues with us. They'll answer questions posed by the longtime host and executive producer of Talk Business and Politics, Roby Brock. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Chris.
Thanks for
being
good
to
see
the two candidates here, too. Thank you very much for being here.
No doubt about it. We'll also have questions from KFSM's evening news anchor, Darren Bobb, and myself. Some of our questions have come from viewers who have submitted them via social media, but neither the questions nor the topics of tonight's debate have been shared with the candidates in advance. We do hope to foster a discussion here tonight and, most importantly, help you learn more about these candidates before you cast your ballot on November the 6th. So let's begin our debate with opening statements from both men. And Mr. Henderson, you've won a coin toss tonight, so we'll begin with you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chris, Roby. Thank you all for hosting this debate. Mark, thank you for joining tonight. It's a shame that Governor Hutchinson didn't join us tonight. When I'm elected governor, I'm going to take every opportunity that I have to talk to the people of this state about my record and my vision. And I hope that he'll join us in future debates. But I'm privileged to be here tonight and so proud to be a candidate for governor. I have deep faith that our state has as much or more untapped potential than any other state in the country. And I believe that in part because of the experience that I and my family have had. Just 2 generations ago, my grandmother was born in Oil Trough, Arkansas. She went to the 8th grade twice because there was no 9th grade. Just 2 generations later, her grandson, before he got to run for governor, had the opportunity through Arkansas Public Schools, through the University of Arkansas, to work at NASA. And I later got to work in the private sector. And for the last decade, I've had the privilege of working with some of the most brilliant educators and students in the world in education in eastern and southern Arkansas. These experiences have given me deep conviction that we can make dramatic progress as a state for all of our families and all of our kids if we set the right priorities, if we take on the right challenges. But we have a stark choice in this election. Governor Hutchinson has said all year that his top priority in the next session is a $180 million tax cut that'll go almost entirely to the most affluent people in our state. I think that a better course is to take those resources and invest in public education, make this the best state in the United States to be a public school teacher. We can do that. Governor Hutchinson's economic development plan rests entirely on attracting businesses in from out of state and overseas. And that's fine, but it misses our greatest resource, which is our people. We could provide resources and training to build great small businesses in every town in this state. When it comes to health care, we've recently made new obstacles for people to get access to Medicaid. What we should be doing is focusing on how we lower the cost of health care. That's the most urgent challenge in front of us right now. Governor Hutchinson, even in the wake of the indictment of a state senator last week, even in the wake of the sentencing of another last week, he said that we can't do anything proactively to solve the ethics and the corruption violations that are plaguing our state legislature. I've released 7 proposals to address this proactively. I think we can make dramatic progress over the next 10 years. We can set up the next generation for things we can't even imagine yet. But it starts with the right priorities and the right leadership, and that's why I'm running for governor.
Okay, Mr. Henderson, thank you so much. The next opening statement, Mr. West, will come from you.
All right, and I also want to thank KTV and Roby and Chris. Jared, thank you for being willing to sit down with an old Libertarian guy and get this debate on. I also want to thank KFSM and KIT for helping us get this thing together. And I, too, am very disappointed that the governor isn't joining us tonight. I would love to have him here to defend his record and talk about his record, because there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems. So in lieu of not being able to have that, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about the plan that we have for Arkansas. Because I too see an Arkansas full of potential, full of people that are ready to pick this state up and take it to the next generation, to prepare it for the jobs of tomorrow, And one of the things that I would like to do and like to talk about tonight is what I see as the greatest danger to that in Arkansas, and that is the overreaching and ever-expanding state government that continues to overreach and expand into our private lives. It continues to be a detriment against small businesses. It continues to stand in the way of what we can have as real progress in this state. The thing that I've said the most on this campaign is I want to see Arkansas become the destination state for liberty. And that liberty isn't just about individual freedoms that we all hold so dear, but it's also about economic freedoms. The freedom of businesses to be able to open and work and do things in their communities without wondering if they've paid enough for the right government permission to do so. It's also about the opportunity for people to be able to make decisions without worrying if their right to carry a firearm is going to create an issue with the law enforcement because of unclear things that have come out of the Attorney General and the Governor. We also believe firmly that we can begin our state on a path toward very low taxation. I believe that we need to engage our communities, and we can engage them by freeing them from the regulatory and high-tax atmosphere that we have in this state that makes us less competitive than a lot of states around us. If we're going to compete to keep people in Arkansas, we're going to have to become competitive when it comes to taxes and regulations and the things that keep people from staying in Arkansas. And we're going to do that. And that's what we hope to do, is to expose how Arkansas individuals, when given the opportunity, have what it takes to build this economy, to build this state, and to get our state on the right direction, on a path that is toward more liberty and toward more opportunity for all Arkansans.
Okay, Mr. West, thank you so much. Let's get down to the meat and potatoes of this. Let's do some questions and answers. The first question will come from Roby, and it's directed to Mr. Henderson.
All right, I'm going to ask you both a question, but I'm going to ask it differently to both of you a little bit because I think you got different positions on this. Let's begin with tax cuts. Yep. You referenced the governor's tax cut proposal for what he wants to do if he's reelected for the next session. It sounds like from your opening statement you're opposed to cutting taxes. You want to keep the money that the governor's proposing to cut taxes and use that as an investment in some other things, education you mentioned. Are you opposed to the governor's tax cut plan, or are you opposed to cutting taxes?
The governor's tax cut plan is only limited to the top 11 or 12% of wage earners, and I'm like, I think everyone else I've ever met, I want to pay the lowest taxes that we can. But when we look at tax cuts for the wealthy and the affluent, we've got to weigh that against other ways to build competitiveness in this state. We could provide our teachers a 10% raise next year. We could add on 3.5% for 2 years following and barely cut into half of the governor's proposed tax increase. And I think that we need to ask ourselves, which is going to create more opportunity? Which is going to make this state more competitive? And for me, it's a simple choice. And we haven't even gotten into infrastructure. We haven't even gotten into roads, to making sure all of our citizens have access to high-speed internet and adequate cell phone coverage. These are just a few of the priorities that we need to weigh against tax cuts for the people that are doing best.
So if you were elected governor, you would not advocate for tax cuts?
Not for the wealthiest. I think that if we can provide opportunities to provide more tax relief for people that are living paycheck to paycheck, such as an earned income tax credit, I think that could be great policy. So I'm not in any way opposed to tax cuts, but I don't think that tax cuts for people that are already doing okay, such as the top 10% of our state, is the right investment.
All right, Mr. West, to you, I think I have heard you in your opening statement say you do advocate some lower taxes. So give us some specifics as what taxes you would cut if you were elected governor. What do you think is burdensome right now that you want to see relief from?
Well, I think the biggest burden, and one of the things we run into is the more tax dollars you guarantee the government, the more ways the government is going to try to find a way to spend that money, whether it's on good things or bad things. If you look at what Little Rock is spending and the priorities that Little Rock has now, those priorities aren't Main Street Arkansas. Those priorities are special interests. Those priorities are lobbyists. Our tax dollars are being used to control our health care rather than give us freedom in our health care. And so specifically, I would like to see the income tax get well below 6. That helps all Arkansans, not just the wealthiest. I don't play identity politics. I don't want to pit the wealthy against the poor, different races against one another. We're all Arkansans, and we all need to come together and realize that the biggest threat to our lives is the government taking our money and spending it on its own priorities rather than allowing us to have the money, the freedom, and the power of keeping our money to spend on things that matter to us. You know, a lot of corporations face a variety of property taxes, especially small businesses. These hit family and small businesses the hardest, and we need to eliminate those taxes that are impacting family and small businesses so that they have more freedom. Release the regulatory atmosphere that's also hurting family and small businesses.
So those taxes, like property taxes that you mentioned, those do help fund public education. They do help fund government services in communities as well as at the state level. Are you going to advocate some simultaneous cutting of expenses in state government? If so, what are some specifics that you would, give me some numbers here. You're talking in some generalities here. I want to hear some specifics.
Well, you know, here's the thing. Everybody likes to get caught up in the specific numbers, but your average Arkansas voter isn't saying, hey, I need $2 billion here, $100 million there, $100,000 there. They're saying, when I get my paycheck every week, a fifth of it's gone. When you're running a business and you're trying to make ends meet, you're sending more to the tax man than you would be able to send to your employees and spend to provide for their health care because you're sending so much money to the government. What we have to focus on instead is finding ways to cut our government. As I've talked about cost, a voluntary committee on spending and taxation, we're going to look for areas where our government is duplicating things, you know, where you have departments that have the word's not coming out, but where you have duplicate processes being carried out by different agencies and different departments where there's overlap. We're also going to find areas where there's constitutional overreach and recommended the legislature to make those cuts. So yes, we want to cut spending. We want to facilitate this lower tax atmosphere, but you're going to have to make cuts, and that's some of what we'll have to do through that committee.
Take a little liberty here. Could I get you to respond to his position and you to respond to his position?
Oh, I'd love to. Well, I mean, you know, Mark said, and I actually think if the governor were here, he might agree that the biggest threat facing a lot of people is government overreach. To me, the biggest threat that I've seen from people that I've met is not having schools and teachers available to teach their kids to read in elementary school. Some of the biggest threats I've seen from people is losing their Medicaid due to a ridiculous part-time website that the government's put in place to make them prove they deserve it every month. You know, these are examples of threats that I'm seeing and I'm hearing from people. And, you know, when we talk about government and its size, we're trapped in this 40-year-old debate between big government versus small government. We need to be figuring out how to deliver smart government. And in some cases, absolutely, that's restraining, that's narrowing, that's eliminating redundancies. But in some cases, we need the government to do a smart and effective job to make sure that people have access to basic opportunities, education, health insurance, good infrastructure that affects their quality of lives. That's my position.
Can you persuade him to your position?
I can try. In the business world, you know, that's what my career has been for 10 years. I've run the corporate office for a multi-state heavy industrial construction business. The big deal for us is cost and efficiency. And when we see things that aren't efficient and we're pouring a lot of cost into those things, we have to find ways to cut that, or we have to find an alternative. You know, maybe we have to go to a third-party vendor because us trying to do it ourselves isn't working. Well, what the state of Arkansas needs to do is allow the free market to be that third-party vendor in some of these things, because what we're finding is there is never enough. What you always hear every election, and from people like Jared and different Democrat candidates, is there's never enough. There's never enough tax money for this. There's never enough for that. We went to a forum a few weeks ago, and what you heard was, you know, program after program. Well, it's underfunded here. It's underfunded there. It's underfunded. It's underfunded everywhere because we are siphoning the wealth out of our communities, getting it caught up in our central state government, and it's not getting back into the communities like it should. So I advocate quit taking that money from the communities. Let people have the choice and the freedom to do with their money what they want to. If they want to fund an after-school program, let them. If they want to pour money into a private school or into online education, let them. But remove the barriers that are keeping people from having the freedom and the liberty to decide what is best for their lives and what's best for their communities. People don't need a person sitting in Little Rock to tell them, oh, well, this is your priority in your community, so I'm going to make sure I take enough money out of your community to fund my priority because I think this is what matters to you, whether it does or not.
I do think, too, if the governor was here, he would make the argument that in the first few years of his term, he did pass tax cuts for middle-income and lower-income Arkansans. Had those tax cuts worked? Have you seen them be effective? Although I know the lower income tax cuts are still being implemented now.
Well, I haven't seen direct results, but in general, I think giving more money back to people that are living paycheck to paycheck is a good thing, and I'm not afraid to acknowledge that. Like I said, my concern right now is that we're about to go a step farther. We're about to give a tax cut to people that are doing okay, in many cases way better than okay. And if we do that, I think that we're going to put some really fundamental things in jeopardy. You know, our teachers, their wages have gone down in real terms by 7% since the Great Recession. That's part of why we're seeing more than a 55% drop in the number of people that are entering one of our most important professions. And money's not everything. You know, I don't think the answer is always to pump in more money, but sometimes when it's a smart investment, and this is not just true in government, this is true in business, this is true in any sector, you need to be willing to spend money to make investments so that you can create more opportunity over time. And there's just a real debate to be had here. Is the single most important thing to make it a little bit easier for the affluent, or is it to make sure that we've got a certain level of opportunity, a certain level of quality for all of our citizens so that with hard work, they can dig themselves up and realize their full potential?
Okay, let's move on. We've already plowed through 15 minutes. So let me ask a question, gentlemen, about guns in Arkansas. Last month, the state's largest newspaper published an investigation in which they pegged the number of handgun deaths in Arkansas between 1999 and 2016 at over 8,000. Per capita, that would place Arkansas at 7th worst in the country. The governor responded to that by saying that while some gun regulations are non-starters in Arkansas, he would be open to so-called red flag legislation, which allows the state to at least temporarily take guns away from people who are found to be a danger either to themselves or others or both, as long as their due process rights were respected. Would you support red flag legislation in Arkansas as governor, Mr. West?
One of the fundamental liberties that we have is the liberty to be secure in our possessions and be secure in our life. And that's why Article 2, Section 5 of the Arkansas Constitution says that we have a right to bear arms for self-defense in this state. We have that right, and it's in our Constitution and Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment. You know, you have the right to bear arms. And one of the things that a lot of these laws do is they miss something that's very basic in that is this concept of it shall not be infringed. When you pass a law that stands between someone and their right to defend themselves, either you're on the tab for defending them because you're leaving them unprotected, or you need to give them their right to defend themselves. Now what we're hearing is we want to have these red flag laws, so that and we all understand, people wind up in bad situations, and there's a lot of dangerous, crazy people out there. I mean, we all acknowledge that. No one says there aren't. But one of the things that we need to understand is when you allow these red flag laws, you're allowing another infringement. We made the mistake when we began allowing our gun rights to be negotiated away to begin with. The government has no authority over gun rights. An individual shouldn't have to ask for permission to defend themselves. It's a basic human right. And it's a basic right that belongs to all individuals, and it's something that we should be protecting and defending. And the red flag laws are a bad idea, because what they do is set up a scenario where someone can be maliciously slandered. And if they can convince a judge, with the right lawyer, convince a judge, suddenly somebody's lost their gun rights, and they may not have done anything wrong. And that is the danger of the red flag laws. You risk leaving someone unarmed that shouldn't be. Someone is being deprived of their basic human right to defend themselves based on an accusation that may or may not even be true. So no, I am opposed to red flag laws.
Red flag laws, Mr. Henderson, if you would support them, how would you convince the many proud gun owners in this state who cherish their Second Amendment rights that that's the right thing to do?
Yeah, well, I think I do support red flag laws, and I think in terms of convincing folks, the majority of people that I meet around this state are gun owners or no gun owners. The majority of them are members of the NRA, and most members of the NRA that I talk to, and you can read polls that show the same thing, they support common sense measures. They know that we are being set up for a false choice to believe that we cannot fully respect people's rights to own guns for safety, for hunting, for sport, and we can make it harder for violent people or people with a high propensity of violence to get their hands on them. And most Arkansans that I talk to, regardless of their politics, regardless of how many guns they have, if they have any at all, they get this, and they find this debate to be one of the more frustrating, because we can't even seem to have discussions that are rooted in common sense. We're too mired in false political trade-offs.
Okay, our next question comes to us from our content partners from KFSM in Fort Smith.
Gentlemen, good evening. I'm Darren Bobb from 5 News in Northwest Arkansas. This region growing every day by 30 people a day, they say. Traffic and infrastructure are a huge concern around here. Right now, a study shows RDOT has $475 million shortfall to maintain current roads. This doesn't even include new projects around the state. How does the state get these projects done?
Mr. Henderson, we'll begin with you.
Sure. Well, this is highway funding, infrastructure funding. This is one of the most important issues in this election. I've already talked about the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we don't put ourselves in a worse position by sacrificing revenue from folks that are doing all right for many of our needs, including highways. I would just like to point out, Governor Hutchinson's been in office for about 44 months now. He's got a large taxpayer-funded staff. And to my knowledge, he hasn't put one serious proposal on the table for how we address this issue. And I think that's crazy. There's a variety of different ways that we could do this. I'm open to a lot of them. It would be one of the first things that we put some serious effort into figuring out what proposals will really work. I think that we do need to consider all options. I think for me, the priorities are if we need to raise new revenues through a fuel tax or through a tax on new cars, we need to do it in a way that doesn't strain people that are living paycheck to paycheck further. But, leadership in this case, we have got to find a way to make highway funding sufficient, sustainable, predictable, and we need to look at all options. We need to put some really serious ideas on the table.
I could ask a follow-up question before Mr. West responds. So you don't want to penalize people who are living paycheck to paycheck. You're talking about a fuel tax. How do you levy a fuel tax that doesn't hurt people that are probably scraping enough money together to put fuel in their tank?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there's a variety of ways through rebates. There could be a way to couple it with an earned income tax credit that make it revenue neutral or even better for some of these households. There are ways to do it. Like I said, I don't have the team of policy analysts that the governor has to crack this, but I won't need 44 months to get these people around the table and put some workable solutions. Other states have figured this out. Arkansas can too. We need to make it a priority.
All right.
Okay. Mr. West, highway and infrastructure spending, how do you get the job done?
Well, what I would like to see is us find a better way to emphasize getting the free market involved in our infrastructure. We, again, try so much to get the state to do this and the state to do that. And again, what do we run into? Scarcity. There's not enough money. There's not enough funding. Stuff isn't getting done. Well, that happens every time we trust the state to do something. And Jared proposes, a fuel tax, which is going to hit low-income people. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's going to hit people struggling paycheck to paycheck. And, he says, well, we can offset it by credit. Well, why take it to begin with if you're just going to offset it with a credit anyway? Why take it? Why not come up with a better option? There are plenty of ways to fund things through voluntary forms of taxation. In other states that do toll roads for infrastructure, a lot of places, especially before we had income taxes and all these highway taxes, the businesses in the communities would come together and they would fund to pay for roads because they wanted people to get to their businesses. So I say let's get the state out of the way and give some of these free market opportunities to businesses, to the people, to find a way to make things happen in their parts of the state. Fort Smith, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of good income in Fort Smith that people could put behind fixing those roads if they really wanted them fixed. But what we've created is this society where we sit around and we wait for the government to do something. And the government fails every time we wait. Just look at Puerto Rico right now. The federal government completely failed in Puerto Rico. Every time we wait for the government to do something, they fail. So I say, well, let's quit robbing people of their income and their power and put that power back with we the people in their local communities and give them the freedom they need to come up with those solutions. Because right now so much regulatory thing stands in the way of being able to do that.
What's keeping them from coming up with a solution now? If the people of Fort Smith wanted to pull a bunch of money out of their pocket and fund some roads, why couldn't they do that now?
They're waiting on the government. Everybody is waiting on the government. Right now everybody has conceded that, well, it's the government thing. We just wait for the government to do it. And oh, well, there's potholes. Domino's said we're tired of waiting on the government. We're tired of our pizzas getting flip-flopped around cars. We're going to pave some roads because we're tired of waiting for the government. So let's try to get away from this dependence on the government for everything because the government doesn't have all the answers. And so often the things we rely on them for, the things that most people are okay with being, a lot of people are okay with being taxed to pay for roads. I'm not denying that at all. But what I'm saying is it's not happening. It's not. They had you drive, the Arkansas State Police had the memo, everybody needs to get in the right lane. Well, have you driven extendedly in the right lane in a lot of these highways in Arkansas? Your kidneys are going to have problems if you do. So, we keep depending on the state to fix these things and it doesn't. So we need to get the state out of the way, start freeing up some of that money in the local community, and let's see if some free market opportunities can pop up and can help fix this situation.
Can I try to convince Mark of my position on this one? You know, this is an example. You know, sometimes government is the problem, and sometimes government does get in the way. You know, my wife is brilliant and has built an extraordinary small business over the last several years. And in that instance, I agree. We have a real opportunity as a state to get in to reduce some unhelpful regulation, to get out of the way of entrepreneurs and to let the market do more good. But in this case, you know, I disagree that the problem is the government. The problem is leadership. You can drive on roads in other states, some of which border this state, and by and large, they're pretty good. You know, and so I don't think the issue here is one that government is bad. You know, I think some of America's greatest days are when Eisenhower in the 50s built, you know, a continent-spanning freeway system. You know, America and government sometimes can be great. Right now in Arkansas, our issue is not government getting in the way on highways. It's a leadership problem.
Okay, the next question and our next topic comes from Roby, and it's from Mr. West.
From Mr. West. All right, let's talk about ethics and public corruption. We have seen a lot in the headlines over the last couple of weeks, particularly in the last 7 to 10 days. I saw a heavy sentence delivered on a state legislator of more than 18 years for Senator John Woods, former Senator John Woods. I want to hear more about what you think the role of the governor can be in stopping this level of public corruption that we're seeing, because people are going to do what people are going to do. And you can put a lot of laws on the books and people are still going to find ways around some of those laws. How can a governor, or is it incumbent upon a governor on his watch or her watch to stop public corruption? How would you do that?
Well, the one unfortunate aspect here, and that's a great question, because a lot of people are beginning to lose faith in Arkansas politics because of the corruption that we're seeing and because it doesn't seem to be being dealt with. It seems to be kind of dealt with an attitude, well, it'll deal with itself over time. And I think what the governor needs to do is, and this is one of those areas where Jared and I do have some overlaps, so we agree a little bit on this one, is the governor should be proactive. He should be engaged in this process. Asa Hutchinson wanted Arkansas Works. He pushed Arkansas Works. He got in the legislature. He gave speeches. He went around the state. He pushed Arkansas Works till he got it. Why isn't the governor doing that with ethics right now? Why isn't the governor
about passing more ethics laws, or are you talking about being a watchdog on what's going on that's leading to the corruption charges?
One of the problems you have is you have to have something in place with some teeth that you can, you know, because what good does it do for the governor to go to a senator who's been elected by the people in his district and say, hey, I think you're doing some corrupt stuff, you need to cut it out? That senator's going to be like, well, I was elected by the people in my district, and until they unelect me, I'm going to keep doing what I do, or until they get caught and busted and they're in trouble. So what the governor can do is push the legislature to get the accountability out of the legislature. You know, Jim Henderson has come in, and of course, you know, he's Ace's relative and everything, and he's got this, well, let's let the Senate police the Senate. That's a horrible idea. Horrible idea. You need to have this outside of Congress, because Congress is going to, or the state legislature is going to protect itself. They've protected themselves by staying quiet, by not pushing these things out, by not pushing on each other. And I don't trust members of our state legislature to push each other on ethics, because I'm afraid they're afraid that they may be inadvertently throwing rocks in a glass house. So what I would like to see is a system where if you've been caught taking a bribe, you've got to pay that bribe back to the people in full. If you are somebody who's been engaged and involved in a bribe, you owe that back to the people in full, and that money comes back to the people in tax returns. That money goes back to the people. If there's a piece of legislation that's been shown to be passed through bribery, or a regulation that's come into effect through bribery, or a business that is benefiting through bribery or some other form of corruption, those things need to be up for immediate repeal. Because we should not be held to laws that people broke the law to get passed to begin with. We need better accountability from our legislatures as far as being open about their relationships with lobbyists. And we need to redefine lobbyists to include all these other groups that are pushing for different types of legislative action at the Capitol, so that the legislators have to disclose those relationships. And if they don't, they need serious penalties for that. You've got to have serious penalties for that, and you've got to get a watchdog, an independent watchdog that's not in the Capitol, that's not on the governor's payroll. Not sure how we would fund it, but we need to find some way to fund it outside of being on the governor's payroll or the government payroll, so that they can truly be an independent watchdog over the state legislature to put a stop to the corruption. Sorry.
Uh-oh. I think that's a favorite of your remarks.
Right there, so. Jared?
Yes, well, you know, we need to realize right before Labor Day, State Senator Jeremy Hutchinson was indicted. Last week, State Senator John Woods was convicted and sentenced to about 18 years. We have right now a state legislator representing parts of Hot Springs that is collecting a salary from state taxpayers who is still not resigned, even though we know he hasn't paid state income taxes in more than a decade. And the governor, in June, the last time he sat beside us, said, well, this is a people problem. The people of Arkansas have got to elect better people to the legislature, and that's more or less the only thing that we can do to address this. And you know, I'm not here to say that anything that's happened in the past is Governor Hutchinson's fault. But I think as a governor, it is your responsibility to put things in place to lead so that things like this happen less frequently in the future. You know, my campaign, we released a series of proposals earlier this summer, and we released it again last week. I think that we can and should strengthen the penalties for folks that betray the public trust. Right now, for example, the only thing that can cause a legislator to lose their pension is unlawful killing. We should empower the Arkansas Ethics Commission to have the resources and authority it needs to act proactively. We can shine way more light, provide so much more transparency on the relationship between lobbyists and legislators. We can shine a light and require accountability and transparency around dark money. We've all seen and been driven nuts by these ads in our elections. The least we deserve is to know who's spending that money, who's bringing it into this state to affect our politics and our policies. These are just a few of the things that we can do, and it's a stark difference between myself and Governor Hutchinson, who thinks we need to let the chips fall where they may once we elect our legislators. I think that we can do more and be proactive.
You know, you fired the first volley in this debate against the governor last week. He responded to your critique by pointing out your own ties to a man at the center of this corruption scandal, a lobbyist named Rusty Cranford. When you were director of Teach for America in Arkansas, your organization hired Mr. Cranford, and he helped you secure $3 million in state grants. Yeah. I know there's been no allegation about that involved illegality, but right. What does it say about your judgment that you chose to do business with a man like Rusty Cranford?
Well, we were, one of many of his clients that were legitimate, that did good business to pursue honorable means, I'm sure that none of them were more outraged than I was when it became clear some of the other misdealings that he was doing. And part of this is what gives me the conviction that I had that we need more things in place that ensure transparency. You know, if we'd had some laws in place that had made it required for folks to disclose more of who they do business with, we would have seen people like him coming a lot earlier. And it would have spared the taxpayers, it would have spared other folks in my position from falling victim, to his character and his enterprise. I'm proud of the work that we did with Teach for America. We provided hundreds of teachers to some of the neediest students in this state. We helped thousands of kids get a better education. I'm proud of the work we did there.
Are you aware of any law enforcement interest in the grants that went to Teach for America? Have you talked to investigators about any of those things?
I did once last summer, and there's no interest on their part in our work. They just wanted to know more about Rusty Cranford's operation.
Do you regret hiring him on?
Oh, I wish I hadn't hired him, but I'm proud of the work that we ultimately did. For every minute that I spent working with his firm, I spent 10 minutes working with the governor's staff. We ultimately got $2 million in state money, and that provided a great education for thousands of kids in some of the most impoverished school districts in this state. I wouldn't take that back for anything.
All right. Let's move on to another subject, if we could. Is it, who's first up this time?
I believe it's me, and I think this goes to Mr. Henderson as well. A few weeks ago, a large statue of a satanic goat monster called a Baphomet was the center of a rally at the Arkansas State Capitol. It was an eye-opening response from some religious equality activists to the state's decision to install a monument to the Ten Commandments on Capitol ground. I'm wondering, as governor, for both of you, generally speaking, how will you approach questions of religious freedom in Arkansas? And then more specifically, do you think the installation of the Ten Commandments monument was an appropriate act for the state government, or did it violate the principle that separates church and state?
Let me just say first very clearly, I think that religious liberty is not only one of the most important rights that we have as Americans, it's part of what makes us Americans and Arkansans. That being said, as I watched this debate and all of this play out in recent weeks and over the last year, frankly, I just get angry in some ways. We have had 57% drop in the number of educators entering the profession in the last 10 years. We have seen Arkansas's wages stay at the bottom of the national rankings. We have seen our health care get more and more expensive, and we don't even know why. We've seen the cost of higher education skyrocket. And we've got state legislators that are engaging in political stunts, that are engaging in all these things, instead of addressing the challenges that are really affecting the quality of people's lives, that are really what they're talking to me and what I bet they're talking to Mark about on the campaign trail. This is part of why people get so fed up, because, you know, absolutely, religious liberty could not be more important. But this issue, this is a political stunt by a few legislators that are distracting us from the real problems that people send people to Little Rock to address.
Okay. The installation of the Ten Commandments Monument, was it a political stunt in your opinion?
It's tough to say unless you actually know, the legislators involved and have had conversations with them. I haven't spoken with those legislators, so I couldn't tell you whether it was a stunt on their part. But one of the things that we do have in America and that we do hold dear is religious liberty. I was a pastor for 15 years in a rural church, and Jesus Christ is at the center of everything we do. It's part of the reason I became a libertarian, is because Jesus said, in his Sermon on the Mount, he talked about doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And the libertarian philosophy is, don't harm others, don't take their things. So faith is very important to me. And I know that for some people, having monuments like that at the Capitol is a very important thing to them. It's a statement of their faith. And the thing that bothers me most is what looks to me like the willingness on the part of some to try to play on that deep felt religious belief to try to score political points, to get to gain politically from it. Because for me, your faith is something you should hold dear, and you shouldn't try to use your faith to score points. It should just be who you are, and people should see it. I don't have to place the Ten Commandments in my front yard at home. I want people to encounter me when I'm trying to take care of people that are in poverty, or when I'm helping a ministry for women that are in troubled pregnancies. I want people to see those things out of my life and see that my faith drives those things. I don't have to put a monument in my front yard to prove that I belong. And that's one of the things that bothers me most about this, is it's like there's this insistence that we have to have this monument here to prove that we belong. And what we've done is instigated others to say, well, now we need to put Baphomet there to prove that they belong. And then, before too long, you'll have another group and they'll want theirs there to prove that they belong. And it's like, can't we just belong? And just be who we are, be genuine with who we are, and just be honest with each other and love each other. Because the core of my faith is that you love others. You love everyone. And that's what I try to do, and that's my feelings on that.
Okay.
All right. Can I take the next question?
You're up.
All right, I think I go to Mr. West on this one first. Let's talk about health care. I think you guys have some very different positions on health care. We can talk about the context of Arkansas Works and that. That is the most current kind of topic where we are hearing where more than 4,500 Arkansans will lose their health insurance, more than likely, because they've not met the work requirement that the governor and the legislature instilled in the Medicaid expansion program. Mark, I know you're a free market thinker on health care, so and we do have a time limit here, so I'm going to hold you to your 2 minutes here on health care, and tell me, how do you apply your free market thinking to health care? How could you improve the healthcare situation for Arkansans if you're elected governor from your libertarian perspective?
Well, the first point I want to make is there is an issue here, because what this Medicaid expansion Arkansas Works has created is it's created a cycle of dependence for our state, because we can't afford to pay all this. We need federal money to pay all of it. So if we're truly going to be a state that's free, that's liberated, that is empowered, and its people are empowered, we need to get where we're not dependent on the federal government for funding for A, B, C, D, and E. So this Arkansas Works, this expansion, has created more dependency, not just now, but in the future, especially if more people do wind up on the program and more people meet the requirement.
Would you kill the program if you were elected governor? Would you put an end to it?
I would facilitate a transition out of that into a more free market approach to helping people in need with healthcare needs. We've seen things like this in our state before. In our community in Batesville, we had churches and doctors and nurses and everybody come together, and they had a community healthcare place. And that's what they did is provided healthcare to people who were low income, who were in poverty. And I think that as we get the free market engaged and we open them up, we can have more of that. Right now, again, we're in this state where we're depending on the government to do it. We're depending on the government and what's happening. Well, the government said, hey, you can depend on us, but now we're going to trim the roll a little bit.
You've called Medicaid a corporate subsidy.
It is a corporate subsidy in essence, because the people that will qualify, more than likely you're going to find them working for your bigger corporations. They're working very low hours, just enough hours to qualify, just enough, making just enough to qualify for it, so the company doesn't have to pay for the health care benefits. So it winds up being a big corporate subsidy is what it winds up being in just the Arkansas Works aspect of it. But again, we need to begin facilitating this transition so that we are not dependent on the federal government, and so that people are not dependent on the government, so they're dependent on people in their community. We used to be about community. Community used to matter to each of us. Now we say, well, if you're sick, just go apply for this and the government will take care of you. Why don't you take care of your neighbor? You know your neighbor's in need. Do what you can to help them. Ron Paul, he's a doctor, and that's one of the things that he did was a certain percentage of all the cases he met were people that couldn't afford the health care, so he did it free. We need to allow the free market to engage. We need to allow our compassion to engage, because we are compassionate people. That's the reason we talk about things like Medicaid, is because we are compassionate people, and we need to ignite that compassion and engage it in our local communities and allow the free market to step in and help with that.
Jared, I don't think you're not a compassionate person, but I think you have a different philosophy on healthcare than Mark does.
Yes. Well, I want to start just by saying, the governor has not put in place a work requirement for Medicaid. He's put in place an internet requirement. Last week he held a press conference about government regulation, and he stood by what looked to me like 24 reams of blank copy paper to announce the regulations he's cut. But he's put in place a few new ones between people, some of our most vulnerable people, and their health insurance. We have a part-time website that you have to fill out and catch open once a month to prove that you deserve Medicaid. And I absolutely believe that the government and bad policy can dissuade people from working, but that's not what Medicaid does. Medicaid makes sure that some of our most vulnerable people have access to health insurance. And as we scale that back, as 4,500 people, for starters, lose coverage, it doesn't just hurt them. This means more doctors, more nurses, more healthcare professionals that are going to perform uncompensated care. If we continue to scale back Medicaid, we could see some of our rural hospitals put in jeopardy, as we've seen in other states that haven't done the same. And this also affects the quality of life for children whose parents have lost their health care. This creates tougher and more tense home environments that can lead to all sorts of other negative outcomes. And so I think this is bad policy. And I think, as I look at it, it is either incredibly poorly designed or it is intended to push people off the rolls. And we can get fewer people on Medicaid over the next decade. We can make dramatic progress, but it involves addressing the root causes. We have one of the highest child poverty rates in the United States because we don't even talk about the fact that in most years we have one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the United States. We could equip our kids with knowledge. We could break this cycle of poverty. That's how you get people off of Medicaid. You lift them up. You help them to realize their full potential to complete their education and to live more empowered lives. That's how we address this.
If you were elected governor, would you end the work requirement? And there has to be some legislative practicality there, too. You've got to get some sort of solution through to maintain Medicaid expansion through what could be a Republican-dominated legislature.
I would do everything I could to end the internet requirement. That is what this is. Again,
would you expand it to other ways to meet that requirement that you're looking for work?
Not unless I was provided evidence that this was really dissuading people from working. Again, you saw welfare reform in the 90s that did move people from welfare to work. Sometimes this is true, but I don't think, and I have yet to meet anyone who is sitting home at their couch saying, I'm not going to go get a job today because I've got Medicaid. Medicaid doesn't ever put any cash in their pocket. It doesn't improve their day-to-day quality of life. It just makes sure that they have access to treatment if they get sick. That's not something that dissuades people from working. You point to me things that are keeping people, able-bodied people, from getting to work, I'd be happy to address them so the right incentives are in place. But taking people's health insurance away is not the way to do it.
Okay, we've had a Ron Paul reference and a Dwight Eisenhower reference. This is my kind of debate. I'm enjoying this. Let's bring KFSM's Darren Bobb in for the next question now. Darren?
We have schools in Northwest Arkansas that have decided to allow teachers to carry firearms. Other schools are allowing armed school resource officers. Should schools be allowed to decide on their own to have armed adults on campus?
Armed adults on campus, Mr. Henderson.
Yes. Well, so I do support school resource officers. I went to public schools here in Arkansas, I'm proud to say, and we had a school resource officer, I know, in high school. I can't remember further back than that. And he was an incredible member of our community. He didn't just keep us safe. He introduced many of us to law enforcement. He'd help us build trust and a good relationship. I think once you get beyond that, I think all of our students deserve the access to the best. And we have said in the governor's recommendations and in this committee that a school resource officer is the best way to go. And I think if we believe that, we need to provide the resources to make it accessible. We shouldn't ask some of our students to settle for something less, which is arming teachers or other lesser trained staff members. And the governor said when these recommendations were being announced, he said that we don't have a timely or more urgent priority than the security of our children. But he later said if a district doesn't have enough money for a school resource officer, they weren't going to get any help. I'm still trying to reconcile that in my mind. If this is truly our most important priority, surely it's more important than tax cuts for people in the top 10% of wage earners in the state. I don't understand his position, but I do support school resource officers as a good solution for security.
You talked earlier about your passion for the Second Amendment. Does it extend into our children's schools?
Yes, it does. I think that what we run into is a situation where you can target a resource officer, and once you get that resource officer out of the way, it's slim pickings. We need to allow the teachers and staff who choose to do so to carry firearms on campus. A lot of people balk at that because they're scared of the idea of there being guns on campus because we have allowed this fear of guns to infest all of us. But I would much rather know that if someone shows up at my kid's school with ill intentions and with the firepower to pull them off, that there's people there that can put a stop to it. But there are other things that we need to take into account as well. Our schools need to be more engaged in mental health type assessments, so that so our guidance counselors aren't stamping papers and doing scheduling and that type of thing. They're actually dealing with students, so they're able to see where you've got a troubled student. Maybe they'll be able to cut off something by being able to be more engaged with a student and maybe cut off.
Would that be the equivalent of a red flag law, though, if you have that in place, where you're identifying somebody who might be a menace or a potential menace to society, and you're wanting to keep a gun out of their hands?
Well, I didn't say keep a gun out of their hands. I said the guidance counselor needs to be able to see these students and deal with those students one-on-one to, try to diffuse whatever the situation is or diffuse whatever's going on in that student, whether it's a mental makeup or an emotional makeup or there's some sort of disagreement going on that's created that scenario. We also, one thing that we also need to take into account, because unfortunately, these things are reality in our country. We need to make sure that if we are going to be sending our kids to these schools, that our nurses and people on campus need to also be equipped with the means to help. My wife is a school nurse in Batesville, and she went to a clinic, and one of the things they talked about was these tourniquet things. And most schools don't have them, but they say that most kids in school shootings that die, most people that die in school shootings, die because they bleed out waiting for help. But if you have nurses in school districts that are equipped with these tourniquet kits, they can be there and be able to provide wound care and maybe save more lives if these things do occur. We need to have a full-scoped approach to securing our schools. Each school district deserves or each local school area, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, they need to come together, and each school district needs that freedom to decide what's best for the students in that school district. They don't need a governor or some committee telling them what they have to do with their school district as far as that goes. It should be their choice to decide what's the best way to secure their school.
Okay, let's try to get some more ground covered in the time we have left. A little over a year ago, President Trump announced that he would withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accords. Since that time, 16 state governors and the governor of Puerto Rico have come together to pledge that they would continue moving their states toward the goals of Paris by mandating the reduction of certain pollutants in their state. If you're governor, would you join that alliance? Would you push Arkansas toward the goals of the Paris climate deal? And from a broader perspective, what are your goals when it comes to protecting the environment in Arkansas?
Well, first and foremost, I don't believe that protecting the environment is the responsibility of the governor. It's the responsibility of every individual person in the state of Arkansas. And what the governor should be doing is, working with people, working with industries, working with businesses to try to facilitate those things. But as governor, no, I would not mandate that you have to meet this standard or that standard, because what you see so often is it cripples us when we're trying to compete with countries and areas that aren't doing those things. And that's part of the reason, you hear a lot of people fuss because, President Trump is the president, but a lot of the reason he's the president is because for so long there's been these mandates, and these mandates cripple businesses, and they hurt people's jobs, and they hurt American income. And I don't want to see these things hurt Arkansas income and hurt Arkansans in the process.
Okay. Mr. Henderson, would you want to push Arkansas toward the goals of Paris as governor?
Yeah, I mean, as a father, as someone who's had a little bit of experience in science, I think that I could do my job as a dad if I didn't support doing what we can to protect the environment. I think, though, by not going in that direction, we're missing a huge opportunity. I don't think the way that we build a better future for our environment, for our kids, is necessarily through a whole bunch more regulation. Arkansas, one of the biggest opportunities that we have missed for years is being strategic about our economic development as a state. And Arkansas is one of the richest states in the country when it comes to the amount of solar energy that we have shining on this state every month. I think we're 11th or 12th based on the people I've talked to. Developing a robust, incredible solar energy economy could be something that could be an extraordinary gain over the next decade. It could be something that we could hand our kids in 25 years that could create thousands of jobs. It could make a cleaner, safer environment. And we've already seen some promising results in a few communities that have taken this on. I think we're missing a huge opportunity in addition to our responsibility to address what is one of the most pressing needs, which is climate change.
Robbie, next question.
All right, Jared, I will come to you first on this. Let's talk about what's going on in Arkansas's prisons right now. Yeah. We have seen a number of prisoner deaths. We're still awaiting some explanation of what went on, although I think there's a consensus that it was drug-related and that there was contraband that is being circulated there. What needs to be, how do we need to reform Arkansas's prison system? What's the priority? What's the plan? What's the steps?
Well, this is an enormously important question for the lives affected and for the potential costs. There was a study commissioned in the last few years that estimates we might have to spend more than $500 million in the next 4 to 6 years on prison facilities. And it's going to be tough for the state to afford that. I think we can make progress on this, but we are going to have to look at every step in the chain. Arkansas has the 4th highest rate of incarceration in the United States. We have to be able to do better than that. There's got to be ways that we can maintain public safety, but also be smart about who we're putting into prison, what their experience is when they get there, and what their experience is when they get out. I've been talking to members of law enforcement all over the state to try to build a credible plan that we'll be releasing later this month. And it involves a lot of things. First, of course, a lot of it starts with early childhood education, which you may say, what does that have to do with the adult criminal justice system? But one of the single greatest predictors about whether or not a child is likely to be incarcerated one day is their 4th grade reading score. We need to take that on right at the start. When you have young kids that are first-time offenders, or they're guilty of small amounts of drug possession, they have not yet become fully addicted, but they're not selling, but they've got small amounts of drugs. We need to find ways to treat them, to break that cycle, give them a chance to get back on their feet, to back away from their mistakes before we incarcerate them and institutionalize them into a life of incarceration. Once people are in prison, of course, they need to serve their sentence. Of course, they need to pay their debt to society, but we also need to be preparing them with trade and education such that when they get out, if they are willing, if they are able, they can be positive and constructive contributing members of society. When people get out, we need to do what we can with job placement, with the continued job training. Right now, we continue to make obstacles to housing and to jobs once people get out, and it makes even people that have no desire to reoffend again, oftentimes they're left with few options. We can do something. Would you restore
their voting rights?
If they paid their debt to society, they ought to have their rights restored.
All right. Mr. West, what would be your plan for stopping what we're seeing with these prisoner deaths? What would be your plan to, make our prison systems safer and more responsible for what they are supposed to be doing, which is incarcerating these people that have broken the law?
Well, if we are going to be locking people into prison, then we are on the tab for making sure they're taken care of when they're there. That's just a basic humanity thing. And I know that some people believe that, if you're in prison, then, you did something, you deserve to be there, so whatever happens to you there, you get what you deserve. Well, that's not the way we should be. We call ourselves a Christian nation and a Christian state, and that should extend to our practices of incarceration. But one thing we have got to really begin looking at is why we have so many people incarcerated. We have a high incarceration rate in this state. Part of it is we have a lot of people that do get locked up for drug offenses. When I believe that drug use, drug abuse, drug addiction, that's a healthcare issue. That's not a prison issue.
Would you advocate for lighter sentences for folks that are convicted of that? Or would you, as governor, would you release some of those folks if you looked at their cases?
Again, you'd have to look at a case-by-case basis on that. But what you have to do is begin looking at treatment, finding ways to get people who are battling with drug addiction, battling with drug abuse into treatment. Now, if they are, committing property crimes and hurting people because of their addiction, then no, they should be in prison. I'm talking about those that, nonviolent offenders, they've not committed property crimes, but, they've got an addiction problem. I think the worst place you can send someone with an addiction problem is prison, because they're going to be twice as likely to reoffend when they get out if all they've gone in for is drug use or drug possession. So we've got to find a way to get people into treatment instead of into prison. We've also got to focus on jobs and on education. I think that if we get more free market things into our education, if we allow private schools, if we allow people to keep more of their tax dollars so they can pay for private schools, and education is key, because a lot of these kids wind up in these criminal situations because they don't have the education or the opportunity to do something else. You have this, they call it a high school to prison pipeline, because they don't have the education, they don't have the tools, they don't have the job skills, so they wind up in crime and wind up in prison. So we've got to find a way to cut that pipeline off, work through education, get involved and engaged in our communities as far as job skills. That's a big thing. Businesses need to be working to provide job skills to high school students, whether it's welding, whether it's being an electrician or craftsmanship, those type things. Have businesses sponsor those things in high school so that kids can begin getting that education and have a marketable job skill when they graduate, or even if they drop out, they still have that marketable job skill so they're not left in crime.
We are running short on time. We did ask our viewers last week for questions they may have for the two of you. Let's see if we can squeeze in a couple with just some quick answers. Andre Bennett asks, where do you stand on the minimum wage in Arkansas? Will you raise it as governor? It's currently $8.50. There's a proposal on the ballot now to raise it to $11 an hour.
I believe is always zero. You can always not have a job. So I wouldn't do anything from a government standpoint with wages.
Okay, Mr. Henderson?
I support the increase. You should not be poor if you work a full-time job.
Okay, Roby?
Well, I thought you had another question there. I've got a question.
I got plenty. Right?
You go. Well, you have some viewer questions.
So.
Do your viewer
well,
questions
we've got another. So Caitlin Barrett asked the question, Mr. Henderson. How do you plan to fix the pay scale for longtime state employees? Would you agree that a person who has worked for the state for 10 or more years should make significantly more than a new hire?
I'm not sure about that. I know that they start to qualify for pensions at that point, which is a good incentive, or around that point. The most important issue I'm hearing for state employees right now is the performance-based system, I think, which is a good idea in practice, but the implementation's been really rough. I'm hearing that from almost every state employee I talk to.
Okay. State worker pay?
State workers should be paid according to their abilities, and seniority should have some impact. But I agree with Jared. What I'm hearing from a lot of state employees is the way they've done this performance-based thing is just not working the way that it was promised, and there's a lot of upset people over it.
Okay, you want to get one quick one in before we have to go?
I'll let you get that last one right there. That's a good
oh,
one.
You like that one? Okay. We can't control the Twitter names of our viewers, but Bongo Willie asks, will you punish industries that hire undocumented workers in Arkansas? And let's expand that question to your overall approach for handling undocumented people living and working in Arkansas, especially those who may run afoul of the federal government.
Yeah. Well, I think that the vast majority of people that come to this country, they do so to build a better life for themselves and their families. And that's true now, as it's been true in the generations over the course of this country's history. And I think that we ought to act with that as our foundational first principle and what we organize around. Now, if people, whether they're documented or not, if they commit violent crimes, if they're a threat to society, they need to be dealt with to the fullest extent of the law. But we need to make sure that everyone that is living here is treated with justice, is treated with compassion, gets a fair shake in our economy. Yes, is expected to work hard and play by the rules, but if people do that, I think that we can have a compassionate society that is stronger as a whole. And I think that none of that is inconsistent with having secure, safe borders.
And for industries that hire undocumented workers in Arkansas? I
think that, I approach this from the workers' perspective. I think that people need to get paid fairly. They need to be treated by the same set of rules, everyone who works for a company. And that's my guiding principle, whether they're documented or undocumented. Again, I think that we can treat people in accordance with the best values of this country. I think that we can have secure borders at the same time, and I think that we will be a stronger nation as a result, as we have been in every generation in this country's history.
Mr. West?
I don't believe that it's the government's place to be involved with who a business is hiring and who they're firing and how they're managing their employees. I know a lot of people want to, they do get caught up on the undocumented immigrant situation, but so many are coming here just because they want an opportunity to provide for their families, to advance their life, to have that chance and that shot. One of the things I've seen recent news, the H-2B visa down in Texas, there are a lot of lawn care services that are potentially going bankrupt and going out of business this summer because we have put a choke on the H-2B visas. When the harder we push against it, it seems like the more problems that are created. Prohibition has never worked in U.S. history, and I think it also applies to the border. But you can have a strong border without being inhumane toward these human beings. I mean, we have to treat people as human beings, and that would be my stance.
Well, our hour has flown by. We're even over our hour, but that's the magic of the internet because time is infinite. But it is time for closing statements, and Mr. West will begin with you.
What I hope you've seen tonight is a difference of viewpoints. If you are in favor of the government staying at its size and continuing the things that it does and continuing all the programs and pouring more money into those programs and doing those things, then I'm not your guy. You've got two guys on the ballot, and neither one of them can do that for you. What I am is I'm the other guy. I'm the guy that if you're tired of what government's doing, you're tired of government being involved in your private life, in your business, and the things that you're trying to do to succeed and get ahead, I'm your guy. Vote for the other guy when you go to the polls. We can do so many amazing things in this state if we would just empower people with the liberty to do them. That's what I want to do. My campaign is about empowering you, giving you the best opportunity you can have, and that is an opportunity that doesn't include government regulation, government overreach, and high taxation. That's what I offer you. I offer you a world that we facilitate things out of the government hands and into the private industry and into the free market to allow people who have very innovative ideas to come up with the solutions for our future, come up with the jobs that our kids are going to work as they grow up. So as you go to the polls in November, just remember that, you look on there, you've got the Democrat and the Republican, you got the other guy. I would like you to just take a chance, make your mark, and vote for the other guy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Henderson.
Yes. Well, thank you all for hosting this debate. Thank you, Mark West, for being here and for sharing your ideas. Governor Hutchinson in January, in his State of the State, he said that the state of our state is stronger than ever before. And I think that outside of a handful of zip codes in central and northwest Arkansas, that's a crazy statement. But the good news is, I do believe fully that over the next decade, we can seize a few fundamental opportunities, we can address some of our biggest challenges, and we can make more progress expanding opportunity and justice and equity than we have maybe in any other single decade. But we're not going to do that by investing in old, disproven solutions. We're not going to do that simply by more tax cuts only for the most affluent people. We're going to do that by making sure that everyone's got a fair shot, if they work hard and play by the rules, to build up and live a life of opportunity and achievement. I fully believe that in 10 years, Arkansas can be the best place in the United States to be a public school teacher. And I know that if we achieve that, we'll do incredible things to provide equity and excellence for all of our kids in our public schools. I know that we can provide some basic resources, some basic training, access to health care that will help us build scrappy and successful small businesses all over this state, if we'll start with the assumption that our greatest resource is our people. I know that we can make progress solving the most urgent challenge in healthcare, which is figuring out how we get the cost of health insurance under control. But to get there, we've got to start by quitting these ridiculous debates that we're having over who should have access to Medicaid and what obstacles we can put in place to keep them from it. I know that we can break the cycle of childhood poverty in this state if we'll face the reality that we have one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the country. And we look and see that other states, some of whom don't have near the resources or the talent and capability that we do, have cut this, in some cases, in half. We can do this. In 10 years, we can find ourselves with a record of achievement. We can find ourselves not just caught up, but ahead on some of our biggest challenges. And we can set our kids up to do some things that we can't even dream of yet. That's why I'm running for governor, because I want us to seize this moment. I want us to take on a few big opportunities. I want us to have the courage to face some of our biggest challenges. Thank you, and I'd be honored to have your vote in November.
Jared Henderson, Mark West, thank you both so much for being with us tonight. And that does wrap up our debate for this evening. From wherever you are in Arkansas or beyond, thank you for joining us. If you missed any part of this debate or would just like to watch it again, you can find it anytime on the KATV Facebook page. And don't forget, vote on November 6th. Good night.